Hello, everybody, and welcome to Composer Talks with White Bear PR. This is our second episode, and I am really excited to have our second guest, Andrew Prahlow. This series is about talking to some composers of the film, television, and video game industries, having very insightful conversations. And so I'm very happy to introduce Andrew Prahlow. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. Now, Andrew Prahlow, he recently scored the captivating music for the Mobius Digital Annapurna Interactive video game Outer Wilds, which has received numerous Video Game Music of the Year accolades, including a BAFTA Game nomination and 2 Gang Award nominations. So congratulations, Andrew.
Thanks. Yeah, I can't believe it still. So
It must be amazing because this is your first video game, right?
this is the first one that really broke out. I'd say overall, this is probably more like my fourth. I did like a VR game a couple years ago called Eclipse Edge of Light, and that did pretty well, but the VR user base is pretty small. So
Mm-hmm.
um, this being on console and PC like really helped push uh, the user base to a really, really wide level.
Nice. Nice. And so, did you enjoy the experience of scoring for video games, and how is it different than your previous scoring work?
This one was especially different, even compared to a lot of games I've done in the past, because there's the on-screen diegetic traveler music, and combining that with the actual score, and then going into the more sci-fi ambient elements, and kind of swapping between that and the quantum music, and trying to find a way to combine these three genres into one cohesive score, and then one cohesive album for when we release the soundtrack.
So, you mentioned all the different kind of styles of music that went into scoring Outer Wilds. Now, did you know that this was going to be the case, or did it evolve, or the process of creating the game, or how was the discussion with the game creators on how the music would evolve?
The camping and space elements started from the very beginning, and with that I started to work on the folk tunes first before
Mm.
getting into the ambiances. As we were Alex was prototyping ideas and starting to come up with story elements with his sister Kelsey, and um I was brought on around the prototyping stage like a little bit after that. So this has been a long process, and I'd say with the way that the game was set up with a time loop, luckily over time it gave me the chance to go back and really rework things until it was over the past few years. The score has really changed. Like the heart of it stayed the same, but the cohesion between the really trippy ambiances and crazy guitar effects combined with the kind of grounded on planet Earth. I mean, there it's called the Hearthians, their Timber Hearth. That is feels very humanistic in nature for sure.
Mhm. So, was that like more of an exploratory process, or were you given very specific directions in regard to that sound?
It was very exploratory. They left it up to me, which was very kind of them, and I could spin any idea off of Alex to see what he would think. Sometimes I would even write something for a certain planet, and depending on how the game was changing visually or story wise, we'd actually move stuff around eventually. So some cues ended up somewhere else in the game world than I intended, but then it worked better because everything was moving around, and as they were gray boxing areas and solving any problems there might be in that as well.
Hmm. So, of course, the journey begins in the game with that unforgettable banjo theme. And I just wanted to know, how did you come up with the idea of that theme? Why did you land on banjo? And were you discussing any other instruments kind of beforehand, or was that part of this whole exploratory process?
That was the exploratory process. The banjo seemed fun because acoustic guitar seemed too obvious, even though I ended up using it in the end for parts of the score. And it felt just a little bit more unique. And I thought, I was like, why not make sci-fi music with banjo? That's just kind of out of the ordinary, and it gives it that
Hmm.
backwoods style. So it's fun to manipulate the banjo and also just use it normally as well. Alex grew up in the Midwest, and so did I. And I think we were kind of I approached it in a way of like kind of all the emotive indie rock from back in like the late 90s and early 2000s, and taking that
Hmm.
style that I really that really helped me want to write music in the first place. And being able to put that into a score was pretty fun and felt very nostalgic to me. And a lot of the game story is about nostalgia in certain ways. So to combine that element with the standard sci-fi was just, I don't know, it was just great. And I didn't get tired of doing it for all the years we were in and out of development. So it was just a really unique opportunity.
Now, because we keep touching on this fact that you were given all this space and time to kind of explore ideas and not specific directions of what the creators exactly wanted, can you just talk through a little bit about this exploration process? Like what does that entail? Is it a lot of trying and failing, and are you just bouncing any ideas off the game creators, or are you just kind of keeping it all internally? Or, if you could just talk us through a little bit about
The more the folk and backwoods elements came out really easily since there wasn't a lot to discuss. It was very straightforward and grounded in reality. I'd say the experimental process was more with the Nomai alien civilization, where we would just talk about emotions in descriptive words of what he wanted me to convey through their technology. And it had to feel emotional in certain ways, since a lot of their music is just kind of giving clues to the player that you're somewhere important. You should explore it and find whatever is there to unlock as you're reading through all the text with your translator tool. So
that?
with that, it would just be me creating a bunch of textures at home and saying, what do you think of this one? What do you think of this one? And what parts do you not like about this texture? What parts do you like? Because a lot of times there wouldn't even be artwork yet. It would just be using my imagination and him using his, and me coming up with how I visualize it in my head through with the audio. So
Hmm.
that was a lot. I wouldn't really say it was trial and error. It was more honing in on the exact elements that felt right. And then there would even be times where once we got into the game and we thought it felt good, it just, as the game would change, it didn't feel right anymore. So I'd go back and redo it. But usually once we got into those rounds, it was a lot easier because I knew what was missing, and he did too. And after spending all this time discussing it, it slowly, like, the process sped up. Once we would lock in like on a couple of the ambient elements, then I kind of had a template to work with in ways, and knew which effects worked and felt like part of the Outer Wilds world without distracting from the homely elements of the beginning of the game.
Hmm. I'm gonna move on to trailer work because I really wanted to ask you some questions about how you got into scoring for trailers, and if you feel that's a lucrative area for composers to make a living out of, because I'm sure a lot of people are struggling at the current moment. And so, if you could give any sort of idea of what your career in scoring for trailers is like.
That is, I came about it by just, it was right after grad school, so that would have been almost 10 years ago. I was asked to do some work for smaller libraries, and then we're now good friends. I was hit up out of the blue through an email from a composer named Mark Petrie, and he's
Hmm.
a pretty popular trailer composer. And he said he needed help on a project, and he liked what he had heard me post on YouTube. So I said, sure, I'd love to do that. And I still work with him to this day. We collaborate a lot on trailer music, and sometimes I'll do some of my own. With him, we're always doing more. I'll do a lot of the ambiences and kind of create textures, and we'll sketch ideas out and send them back and forth. Um, and then for my own, it's more like huge rises that will last for like a minute or two, and more like post rock sounding triumphant trailer type things. But I'd say it is very lucrative and worth doing. But it's just very, very, you have to be driven to want to do it, since unless you're working on a custom, there's not really a deadline. It's just like, all right, send us what you got and we'll tell you if we approve it, and we'll give you notes. And then you wait around, and hopefully within a couple months to a year, like, it'll land something big. Um,
Hmm.
so it's about just being consistent on writing trailer music and getting involved with companies that are that not only respect your music but are going to pitch it quite often. So
Hmm.
that's been learning that over time and creating good relationships with pretty cool libraries has helped out a lot in that area. And also Mark has really been a fantastic guide on giving me tips on things that I could improve on, or working with him and learning how he's done it at such a personal level has been incredibly helpful.
Oh, that's great. That's so great that you've got Mark to kind of guide you through that process. It sounds
Hmm.
like having a kind of a mentor in the trailer world obviously is very helpful in kind of breaking into it.
It was super helpful. Yeah.
Well, speaking of mentors, I know that you've done additional music and co-wrote with a number of composers. I saw that you wrote on Westworld, probably with Ramin Djawadi, worked with Jeremy Zuckerman and Benjamin Wynn, and Mark Rivers on Big Mouth, which I'm a big fan of. So I just wanted to know, what are some of the benefits and disadvantages of this collaborative process of working under another composer?
The Big Mouth and Westworld stuff was kind of a strange scenario because they ended up licensing music that I wrote with Mark. So I didn't
Mm,
actually directly work with the composers on the show. We just found out like it just Westworld season 2 episode 1 aired, and then our music was just playing during the whole previously on Westworld for the whole opening 5 minutes. We were just like, well, that's cool.
yeah, that's
And the
awesome.
same thing happened with Big Mouth. All of a sudden, I was watching Big Mouth one day, and then my music just came on. Um, and that was another track I had written with Mark. And that was maybe like a couple years ago we wrote that track, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's just on the show. So I'm not sure how that works. Maybe they're looking for cues to place while the lead composer is working on major parts of the show. But I was just happy to be a part of it and to find out kind of after the fact that my music was licensed in there. Um,
Yeah.
with Jeremy and Ben, they were just they. It was wonderful to work with them for almost 5 years, and I got to learn a lot through them. And with Jeremy, that was back when we used this like Haytel app on iPhones, so we'd be on walkie
Hmm.
talkies like every day because we are all working at our own places. And a lot of the work on Cora was me helping out with Jeremy with MIDI cleanup and working on getting the string parts all ready, and then being the recording engineer and playing trumpet sometimes. And then with Kung Fu Panda, that was a little bit of additional music, but a lot of the same type of thing. And we worked with a soloist named Hong Wang on both shows, who was
Hmm.
wonderful. Um, and I would help create skeletons with pre-existing cues. But the main thing I feel like I learned from that job was how to really run things on my own, which now has been proved infinitely valuable. Now that I'm kind of doing with, like, it was always my goal to be able to work on my own at my own house, my own studio, like Jeremy and Ben always did, and how Mark does, and a lot of independent composers now, rather than going into a big facility. And luckily, I've been fortunate enough to slowly transition over into that.
Cool. Well, my last question for you is, how do you stay sane and creative during this whole coronavirus lockdown? What are you doing? What are your tips?
Not work all the time and pay attention to your mental health. Make sure to still go outside when you can. Cause I know we're not completely locked in. You can still go for walks. Sometimes I'll just ride my like electric snowboard thing around town late at night when there's no one out, and it's pretty fun to do that. Talking to people on FaceTime, um, calling my parents and brothers and friends from other states, checking in on people who live by themselves. And then of course, like writing music still, it helps feel like a normal day if I just work for a couple hours on a new track. But right now everything's going so slow. Like I've noticed things slowing down in trailer music and in television and all that. So
Well, it's good to, like you said, go outside, stay active, check in with friends and family. So good tips overall. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Composer Talks with White Bear PR. We're going to be posting new episodes weekly every Wednesday. And whether you're watching on YouTube or listening via the podcast, we just want to thank everybody for tuning in.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.